Hey guys, I am Game Advisor, and today we're going to be going through an interview with one of the lead developers on Renown. He's actually going to be talking about what they want to do with their game and what you can expect when the early access version comes out, but do keep in mind that everything you hear in this video is subject to change, and we are not sponsored by these devs whatsoever. In fact, if you guys want to help support them, do make sure to go check out their website, where if you are interested in the game, you can pre-purchase it early, but you do not have to. I just wanted to make sure you know that if you want to support the game and you want to get access to some of these tests, you guys can do so by going to their website and purchasing the supporter bundles and things like that. Either way, let's go ahead and jump right on into the video. Hey guys, I am here today with Jesse, the lead game director for Renown. And Jesse, could you just tell us a little bit about what Renown actually is as a whole for the game and what you guys are kind of trying to go for with your game in general?
Of course. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me and doing this video for us. It really helps. So Renown is basically if you took the survival aspects of a game like Rust and then joined it with the combat system of Chivalry 1. And I definitely want to emphasize on Chivalry 1, as that is really what we're sort of trying to base the combat system on. So a more sort of arcadey survival game, purely based on PvP. There'll be a bit of PvE aspects, but it really is about players surviving against other players. And that really sums up the majority of the game in the shortest way possible.
And that actually kind of leads me into our next question, which is you said that there's PvE. So when you say PvE, are we talking like hunting creatures, or are we talking more like actually fighting bandits or something like that?
Yeah, so a bit of both. So of course it's based in medieval Europe, and it's not at any particular time period. That period's pretty broad. But it isn't fantasy. It's very realistic in the sense of the time period and the place that it is on the planet. So there will be animals that you can fight. The like bears and wolves, of course, you'll be able to actually have some combat with, and they'll make use of the same combat system. So that should hopefully make that a little bit more interesting. And then, of course, there'll be deer and rabbits and things that you can kill for other resources. On the other side of the spectrum, the actual sort of more PvE aspect would be bandits. So currently we have in the works a few different tiers of bandits that get a bit harder. So we've labeled the lowest tier actually called bandits. And as they get higher tiered up to like veteran knights, the more complex they are and the more systems they make use of the combat system. And how that's going to work will be basically there'll be maybe like a wood palisade camp that will have some lower tier AI. And then on the higher end of the spectrum, there'll be knights in castles that you can go in and kill and take the loot that's in there. We also would love to have maybe like a caravan that goes down the road that has some a posse of knights that you can kill and loot as well. So there's a lot of stuff like that we want to add for sure.
So my next question for you was, are the maps going to be procedurally generated, or are you planning on having one solitary map that all the players are going to be playing on?
So what's currently planned now is a solitary map that is designed by artist, and that will be what's played. Now that's a mixture of two things. We know a lot of people want procedurally generated maps, which does add a certain aspect of interest in every wipe because it's always a bit different. But I also like the idea that our artists will be able to manually go in and create some interesting places for people to fight, like valleys that are actually hand built and should hopefully look a lot prettier. That's our main initial goal, though we would like to do procedural further down the line, as we know a lot of people love that. Though it really depends on the state of the game and the success of the release, because that is a pretty lengthy process to set that up. So currently, for early access release, that's not planned, but maybe further down the line.
Okay, and again, that's kind of leading me straight into our next question, which is, are the resources going to be like procedurally generated, or should we be expecting them kind of like the old school medieval survival games where, we had like Reign of Kings and there were specific spots where iron was found and those were highly contested areas? Or is it more like Rust where we have nodes that will just spawn near mountains roughly? Or how are we planning on doing the kind of resource respawns, or even maybe those bandit camps as an example, or any other form of resource within the game?
Yeah, it will be a mixture of both those things. So basically, we want to have hotspots where players will be drawn to because, of course, there's going to be more resources spawning there. Hopefully, higher yields as well. That each node has a varying chance of spawning gold, so maybe those hotspots can have more gold in those nodes as well. That's really what's planned for now. So there'll be a sort of like a low spawn rate throughout the map that you'll probably farm out pretty quick on wipe day. And then over time, the groups will start to be drawn towards these hotspots. And that's for mostly nodes. I'd like to do the same thing with wood, maybe like a logging camp that has large wood piles that give you a lot of wood. That sort of thing would be cool as well. And then in the terms of the monuments or the bandit camps, they'll be in set locations, and inside will be loot crates that can give you weapons or it can give you some resources as well. Though that is still a while off, so we still need to balance that out and see how strong we want that to be.
Okay, so we probably won't see that particular mechanic like necessarily right away in the early access, but that's something you guys might implement down the line, depending on how well it feels balanced and stuff like that.
Oh no, we definitely want hotspots and bandit camps to be in early access. That's like a definite thing we want. But more so how well they function with a large full server that over time we'll have to rein it in to see how that works. For instance, is it too OP to give players a full weapon from a bandit camp? Or maybe there should be more gear in there. We need to make sure that it doesn't feel like it's extremely easy to get everything and things still have value, while we also want that feeling of players to be able to get on, run into a bandit camp, dodge some AI, loot a crate, and have a sword. That's definitely something we want as well.
So kind of like Rust, where like you could just open a box and happen upon an AK if you get lucky or something like that, but it may not be full durability and you may not be able to craft it yourself right away.
Exactly. And it would probably be more along the lines of Rust Legacy, which there was a much higher chance of you actually getting a decent weapon in a crate. These days, in the most recent Rust updates, it's you sort of have to put in some time investment before you're actually able to get into those monuments. So we sort of want to like lessen that gap a little bit so people can quickly get in and just run into a rad town or a monument of some kind and get a nice sword. And yeah, you're right, it probably will be a bit damaged, so you'll have to repair it. But it should give you something to protect yourself with for a little while.
Okay. And then speaking of maps, how big are you guys planning to have the map actually be? Is it going to be like ginormous size? Or are we thinking somewhere like, is there a game maybe we could compare it to, or a walk distance to cross it if you were at like full sprint speed the whole time? Or could you give us like some kind of concept as to the ideal map size you're going for?
Yeah, so I guess there's a few ways that I'll go about answering this, because there's a lot of variables that go into why a map is a certain size. So firstly, as we want this to be a medieval themed game and the people will have large castles, we want those castles to feel like actual castles. We want people to have large buildings that are used for crafting inside large curtain walls. So basically that would mean that most players, even a small group, are going to have quite a large base. And then in turn, how many people are we going to have on the server? And when you use those two numbers together, you will then use that to sort of base how large the map's going to be. We don't want everyone to be right on top of each other, but we don't want it to be so vast that you'd ever see anyone. So we aren't trying to aim for we want this massive map that's like expansive and it takes ages to get from a point to another point. The main thing is that we want Renown to be fast paced and we want people to get into combat quickly. So it's whatever really works with the server cap that we can reach, while maintaining that gameplay, I guess.
Okay, and then that kind of just leads into another question I have for you, which is, in the past, you guys have said that your goal was to reach 100 players on a server at any given time as your cap. But there could be more players that maybe could create an account or create a character on that server, just 100 online at any given time. Is that still your goal, or has that changed?
Yeah, that's definitely still our goal. Like we again, it really depends on what we're able to handle when we get to that point. Again, our team's pretty small, so there's only a limited amount of things we can all do at once. But just based on the test we had today, it's looking pretty promising. We had 40 people playing at one time. Of course, there was a lot of issues, but the fact that it could even handle that at all was a pretty good sign when we're this early on. So that's still definitely the plan. And there's a lot of optimization that we have to do. But we really hope we can achieve 100, yeah.
And just to clarify for the viewers, the session he's talking about was basically a test to be able to check out some of the game's mechanics and see how good they can actually handle different amounts of players on their servers. That happened earlier today. So improvements are still going to be made upon that before you guys get to early access and get your hands on it yourself. Now, my next question for you is kind of a personal question, and this is just more so something that I really would love to see in the game, and that's that, is there going to be horses in the game, and can I ride them? And then on top of that, are there going to be other tameable creatures, say like a dog, that maybe I could use to protect my base when I'm offline? Because offline raiding is a definite concern for a lot of players in these kinds of games.
Definitely. So there's a few questions there. So I'll start with the horse one first. So definitely want horses, and we definitely want horse combat, like cavalry combat. How that's going to be handled exactly in the terms of the combat, and if it's going to be too strong, will come down to testing, of course. But we want players to be able to, like land, shove like a spear into the ground. So if anyone's charging at them, they can have at least some sort of protection from a cavalry charge.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, that's something we're really, really looking forward to. And we want players to move around the map quickly. And we've had functioning horses for a little while now. They just need a bit more work before we can bring them in. And then, of course, we need to create the combat system around that. But yes, definitely. And it's not going to be something that's very hard to get. We don't want it to be like you have to really, really grind for a horse, because let's be honest, you'll probably lose it a lot. This is something that we want, maybe tier 2. Most people should be able to get a horse around tier 2, so that should be really, really cool, and really looking forward to that. So yeah, that's that for horses. And then on the for animals, like taming other animals and maybe, I guess, combat AI that works on your side, we're very against any sort of combat AI that is used for the players. So AI that you get on your side of your team to fight for you. That's something we really don't want. There's 2 reasons for that. One of them is, if it's a full-plated character, they really have as much impact on the server as a real player would. And we would prefer that spot to be taken up with a real person playing rather than, say, 20 AI. It's a bit less, of course, because it's not an actual player that's joining the server, but it is still pretty intensive for performance. So that's one aspect. And also the other thing is, it's just very, very hard to balance. And a lot of the time, I just feel like it doesn't create very interesting gameplay. You're fighting AI most of the time in most games that have systems like that. And I really just want players fighting players. And I don't really want you to be out, because it usually is something that you can spam. If you can get a wolf, if you can get one wolf to fight for you, there's no reason why you couldn't get 100 wolves. And then at that point, it just gets out of hand. And some people say it might be a good way to deter Zergs. But if something a solo player can do, get a few wolves to help them, then the Zerg's going to be able to do that too. And it'll just be a Zerg with a whole lot of AI fighting for them. So there's a lot of things on that front that I think I just don't see combat AI working like that. I don't mind the idea of maybe having like a lookout tower that can alert you if there's people nearby. But anything fighting for you, I'm being very careful with. So yeah, that's for combat AI. Sorry, you asked, what was the other question you said? It was the offline rating. Did you want to go into that, and then I can talk about that if you like? Or
yeah, go ahead, and you can talk a little bit about the offline rating and what your concerns are, or how you plan on handling that.
So yeah, you asked about offline rating as well. So that is definitely something that we're aware of, and we know a lot of people talk about this, and it's a thing that's contested a lot. And firstly, I just like to preface any time I talk about offline rating by showing that Rust is a game that is a survival game that's very similar to something we're trying to do, that does not have any kind of offline raid protection apart from traps and auto turrets and things like that. And it's one of the most successful survival games that's ever existed. So there's a lot of people that would like there to be offline raid protection, and a lot of people that wouldn't like there to be. And I'm more in the camp of I do not like offline raid protection really at all. And though I can see how it is a painful thing to get on and have all your things gone after you've been asleep. So there is one thing that I'm willing to try, and this would be something that it's not a massive change to the gameplay. how the reason why I thought of this idea was the main thing I find is painful when playing Rust or any other game that you can be offline rated in. It's not so much the resources that you lose. It's not so much the kits and the guns as much as it's painful. The reality of the issue is that you get on and you can't play. You're back to square one. You've lost your crafting benches. You've lost your ability to create items, not the items themselves. And I feel like that's really an important aspect to think about when talking about offline raiding. If they grief you and you can't use your base, that hurts a hell of a lot more than just having your stuff being taken. So the idea I'm thinking of is if you are offline, people can still raid you. They can get throughout your entire base. They can break everything down to like 1 health if they really want to, if they can be bothered. They can take everything your own, but they can't grief you. They can't completely destroy the things you've worked, maybe 2 days at that point to get to. That is an option that I would like to try. But another thing would be that I think in early access, we're not going to have any kind of offline raid protection, just to see how it plays and to see how people, like it. And if it does really well, then we probably won't introduce it. So that's sort of like my take on offline raid protection.
Well, I definitely like that, but you mentioned that keeping your progress, and I'm just guessing, since you said you're trying to make it like Rust, are you planning on having some kind of a research system implemented into the game where if maybe you get raided and you lose all your stuff, you'll still have those unlocks of recipes or something like that available to you?
Yeah, we do definitely want that, and we want that to be based on clans. So rather than a certain singular player gaining access, a clan works together or a group works together to unlock things for themselves. So we want that grouping system to be a bit more in depth. Of course, we love heraldry, so customization, people creating their emblems, really repping their group that they're playing with. So we want the research to be handled as a whole. You work together to unlock a certain item. Every single person in your group now has that item unlocked. If the clan gets, disintegrated or doesn't exist anymore, then you'd probably lose that. We want that to be handled as like an umbrella of clan, if that makes sense.
I absolutely love that, because I know one of my biggest griefs with Rust in particular is that if I'm not online and I have the recipe to craft something, I have to go over to my computer, log in, craft the item, then I can get off because my buddies don't have access to it. So I think that's absolutely a great idea, and I'm so glad you're going to add that into the game. I think that it's going to make so many players happy, as long as it makes sure that you guys balance it right, which I'm sure you guys will as you continue to work on the game. But that actually leads me into our next question, and I know I keep saying that a lot, but my next question is about clans, and my question is just how big are you expecting them to get? Are we expecting maybe 10 players being the biggest clan sizes you would expect to see, kind of like on a Rust server that has maybe 100 players on it? Or are we expecting like Rust servers where I've seen clans that have 100 players and just completely dominate the entire server to the point where almost every other person just gets squished the second they log in?
Yeah, so I guess initially one thing to say at the start before getting into that is we don't want to have any clan cap. So there will be the ability for people to make a very large group. We don't want to limit people from that. It always feels really bad when you play a game that has a cap on group size and you have an extra friend and you have to tell them, I'm sorry, we're full. That just never feels great. And even if you did have that, you could just create another group and just say you're in the same group. So it doesn't really work, and I prefer not to have those hard systems in place. But we would like to balance it towards 4 to 8 players. I feel like that's a nice middle ground. But of course, we also want server admins to have solo, duo, trio servers that are more inclined for players to make large groups and huge battles. But from a base gameplay perspective, we definitely want it to be somewhere around the 4 to 8. Though I am very curious to see what the clan fights will be like. Like when I played Rust religiously, I was a very big clan person, clan of 20 to 30 people, and that was the most fun I've had in a game. So I definitely want people to be able to experience that too.
So my next question for you is, how challenging do you plan on making the grind for the game? So for an example, we're using Rust as a direct comparison for a lot of things here. grinding all the way up to tier 3 can take quite some time, especially if you're not super familiar with the game. And, grinding all the way up to that for, say, a party of 2 or 3, it could take you, say, ages versus a clan that's got 10, 20 people in it. And so my question isn't just how much is the grind, but also how hard is it going to be to grind for, let's just use C4 as an example in Rust, say the same equivalent rating power as something like C4.
Yeah, so I guess initially the first question, how hard is the grind? I guess the best way of looking at it, I would say, is we want weekly wipes. Obviously, that's what we want to balance around. How I see it is day one is you spend the whole wipe day, first wipe day, is hopefully by the end of that you're in tier 2, you have a decent base there, and you're just making sure that you're pretty safe for the night that you're about to go to bed. And then the second day is finishing off the base, getting your raid equipment ready, and then finally day 3 or even the night of day 2 is the raid, and you go off and you do your first big raid, and then depending on the success, that sort of usually is where people tend to lose their sort of like what's the word, like power or energy. So, they've played the game for 3 days straight. At that point they start to get a bit tired, and it's more of a bit of fun. You're going out roaming and maybe raiding a few people, or you've been raided out yourself, and then the rest of the wipe sort of just a bit of fun. That's sort of the speed that I want it to be at. We also would love for there to be some sort of way we can have people be in a primitive state longer. So like I've always been wasn't a big fan of that, prim in Rust. You just fly through it in 10 minutes. You're out of that pretty quick. You're with a crossbow and a headdress within the first 20 minutes. So I sort of want that to be a bit longer, and there's a couple of ways that we could do that. It could be time gated, which I'm not a huge fan of time gates, but maybe something that appears on the map throughout the map that is a resource that wasn't there before that now allows you to progress through to the next tier, just so you can sort of sit in that tier a bit longer. Now, these are all just ideas that we are playing around with. Initially on early access, that might not be a thing, but we do want people to enjoy that lower tier period a bit longer.
After that, I just wanted to know, what tools for raiding are you guys going to be offering? We know we're going to have access to a catapult and a battering ram and a few other different things. But for those viewers who don't know what exactly you guys are going to be offering for the raiding systems, what can they expect to see within, the raiding environment and the tools they'll have at their disposal?
Yeah, definitely. So as you mentioned, catapults and battering rams. And by battering ram, we can create it's a large battering ram you can actually stand under and push. And that sort of breaks a few walls at a time. We have handheld battering rams, which are sort of able to be looked like a SWAT team door jam, like you're just smacking doors down with it. We're going to have trebuchets, so firing boulders very large distances, ladders, of course, and then finally siege towers, which are about 3 levels high. These huge towers that you can push up and basically enter a base at any height you like. That's really the main ones that you'll have access to.
Okay, and then my next question for you is there really any plan right now to have maybe like a tax system? For an example, if you ever played Reign of Kings back in the day, they had this system where you could become the king or whatever, and long story short, whoever was like the most powerful group could put a small tax on all the other players, and it would take like a small percentage of their resources whenever they gathered as kind of a tax to the king, and it created this whole rise up against them kind of atmosphere. I was just curious if you guys had any plans to add that kind of a system into the game in any way.
Yeah, so not so much a hard system. I really don't like systems that for tax where it's sort of like anyone. It doesn't even really sometimes matter if you're that strong. I remember in some games you can just place down a thing first. If you place it first, then you're the one that takes tax, which just felt a bit wrong. I feel like I want players to actually physically go out to a base en masse and be like, we're going to raid you or pay us tax. And what I would like is some sort of UI system that facilitates that. So you can make a deal with another group, but it isn't enforced by the game. Both parties have to accept the deal, and that might be based on, protection, be like, oh, we'll protect you. Here's an offer of a payment every hour, or we're going to blow your base up. Here is an offer of a payment every hour, or whatever it is. And then the two groups decide to agree, and then I'm guessing there might be like you put it in the banner and it gets sent. And then at any point, either group can just opt out of that. And then, yeah, we want the players to be the ones enforcing and giving the other group the repercussions if they go against it, sort of thing.
Okay, so maybe like a system that supports it, but nothing that like hard enforces it. Like there's not like a lockout or anything like that to raid. It's more so maybe you might put, like you said, like a banner down that they can put resources into, and that will automatically transfer it to theirs maybe every hour. And the other players that the taxes are being paid to maybe could, if they don't see the right amount, then they could decide to go attack them, but they could just do it whenever they want if they felt like it.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't want to force players to or get them stuck into these things. Like ultimately, we want it to feel like they have complete control. And some of the best stuff in Rust I've enjoyed is that social aspect where you're literally going up to another group and going, "Hey, are you being raided by this group over there? Let's work together." Rather than forcing another group to do a certain thing. I think the players doing that themselves while also giving them tools to make that a bit easier.
Okay. And am I just guessing that, this is probably something we're not going to see in early access, like right at early access launch? That might be something you guys implement further down the line, depending if players would want something like that.
Yeah, I think the good way of looking at early access, and this is also because we're such a small team, and it really depends on if we receive more funding and things like that. But we really want early access to be like Rust Legacy. Like it is a very simple. We want the foundation of the game to work well. You can build your bases, raid and harvest, and kill each other with a nice combat system. We don't want to over clutter the game with a lot of bugged out systems that don't work correctly. We want early access to be quite solid, but also not very complicated.
Okay, and then you also said you had a plan to have server wipes roughly every week. Are you planning to also have maybe public servers that maybe go like once a month for players who do want to have that availability? And are you going to have like Rust, for an example, where Friday is basically wipe day in Rust because that's when the update comes out, so it's a force wipe for all the servers? Or are you thinking more along the lines of you might have a couple different servers that are on different days, or a couple different servers that are on 2-week rotations, but the majority would still be on that 1 week or that 1 week rotation that the game is actually balanced around?
Yeah, so we're definitely going to have official servers, and we'd like to have a couple of servers that are 1 week or a month long. But again, we are balancing to a week wipe, and there may be a couple of servers that are solo, duo, trio as official servers that we look after. But we really want the community to go and run away with the game. Go and create community servers, modded servers, however you want the game to be played. If you're an admin running a server, we want you to do that. Some of the most popular servers in Rust, for example, aren't always the official ones. They tend to be sometimes ones run by other people, and that's really what we want people to do. So yeah, we want a lot of people to have any option of the game they'd like to play. But of course, there will be the official options as well.
So can I take that as confirmation that you guys are planning to have some level of mod support at your guys' early access launch and some level of server support where they can maybe customize their own settings for their server and stuff like that?
Definitely, 100%. Yes. So modding, of course, again, small team. We 100% would love to have that on early access and really want to try get to that point, which we're going to try. And on the other end, the server admin tools, 100%, that is going to be something that's needed for early access. We want people to be able to create servers and have quite a lot of admin tools, changing if it's first person, even resource rates, damage rates, whatever it is that you want to change. We want to give as many options as possible to admins.
I think a lot of people are going to be excited about that one in particular. My next question for you is, what really just kind of sets your game apart from other survival games like Rust, for an example? I know you guys are set in kind of the medieval atmosphere and you're set in a specific time period, but if you had to give like one thing that you could say is going to set your game apart from, all the other games that are out there these days, because there are tons of survival games coming out all the time, what would you say is that one thing that might be like that special thing that your guys' game is really going to do well or present to the players that they'll really enjoy?
In my opinion, it's just the fact that it's fast paced. That really is the main thing. If you already incorporate the fact that it's a medieval survival, it's fast paced and PvP focused. those two things are what I feel like separates us from a lot of the other medieval survival games, as well as the fact that we're trying to bring in a more complex skill-based combat system. As much as that does exist, not so much in this maybe fast-paced sort of nature. So I would say that fast-paced and PvP orientated.
And like you said, I mean, the fact that it is medieval and it's a fast-paced game on top of that, like there's really no other medieval fast-paced games outside of like arena games, like, Chivalry or something like that, where you play a match. So I think a lot of people are excited for it just for that reason, but that's good to hear that you guys are really focusing on that fast-paced nature of the game. Next up, I just wanted to ask you, what is your expected cost for the game at early access launch? I know things can change down the road, obviously, so if you want to give us a set in stone number, you can, but I don't know if you guys had an idea as to what you're planning to charge at your early access launch.
Yeah, so we're just hoping for somewhere around 30 USD. We think, we're a small team. Well, we're sure that we can't, we're not going to be competing with AAA titles. But we do hope it's a pretty solid game at launch. And as time goes on and as there's more content in the game, we'll probably push that up. But I think that's a nice ballpark figure. Yeah, that's probably the closest I can say to a definite number.
Perfect. And then the next thing I wanted to ask you is something that's a very hot topic for a lot of players these days. And that's, how are you planning to do monetization after your initial release and, purchasing of the game? Like, are you planning to have microtransactions implemented, kind of how Rust does with skins? Are you going to have, maybe even some battle pass down the road? Like, or do you have like a specific, no microtransactions kind of a method you're planning on going with, or anything like that?
We definitely want skins. That's really the only thing I like the idea of having. From a microtransactions point of view, I don't see any other sort of transaction making sense in a game like this when it's wiped every week. There's no way you can give a player benefit other than a skin. Like, even if you call that a benefit, they just look a bit cooler. So that's really the only thing that I would be considering doing at all. And that could come down to even base skins. It really depends on how the game feels, and we want that to be handled like Rust, like through a workshop sort of system, that people can come to us and create skins, and we can introduce them into the game, and handled through that. That's really the only thing that we're considering.
Perfect. I think a lot of people are going to really enjoy that because, I totally understand. I think a lot of other players do nowadays, especially for a small dev studio like yourselves, having that extra form of income down the road. I'm guessing you're probably not even going to have much of those, if any, at launch. But, down the road, you still have to find some way to make money. And I think that's probably the best balance for people nowadays is, skins, as long as they're nothing that like makes you pitch black and invisible basically at night, nobody's going to be like, oh, I have to buy all the black skins, otherwise I'm at a disadvantage. So I think that's a great way to go down that route if you're going to add some form of way to fund it outside of like maybe a DLC or something like that down the road. Which I also did want to ask, do you guys have any plans, like maybe in a couple of years once you're in full release, to add a DLC to the game of some kind that maybe adds more content or weapons or something like that? Or is that just something that's too far off to really even think about at this point in time?
Oh, no, I think about that all the time. I mean, when you're developing a game, half the time you're spending thinking and dreaming about what you could add further down the line. And I know, at least for myself and the other co-founder of RDPK Studios, Asher, he also loves Age of Sail. So we would absolutely love to see a DLC that's bringing in a sort of Age of Sail, ships, cannons, a couple of like flintlocks and things like that. Of course, that's way, way down the line. For a short term, yeah, we'd like to add updates to the building system over time. I mean, we're going to be adding content a lot over the course of the release, but I wouldn't probably label that as DLC. I'd see DLC as almost like an entire extra game on top of it, really.
Perfect. And then my last question, which is probably the question most people are going to want to know from watching this video, and I think is probably my thing I'm most excited for, is when can we actually expect to get our hands on the game, and when can we expect, if we're going to be getting it earlier than early access for a test or something like that, when can we actually expect to get our hands on the early access version of the game? I know originally you guys had said 2022, but I'm guessing that that's probably not going to happen considering we're almost in December now. And you guys had also talked about early 2023. So I'm just curious where we're at with our release date, if you could give us any ballpark, because I'm guessing you can't give us an exact date.
Definitely not an exact date. I think we were hoping that we'd probably secure a larger amount of funding during that last year, I guess, which has probably slowed down our amount that we think we can get done. Ultimately, we want the game to just be solid. We don't want to release it before it's ready, and that's going to be whenever it can be. But I can give you sort of a timeline of events rather than timeline of dates. So we've just entered Raid Alpha, which is basically the raid module, which I'm sure you'll be seeing on screen, and that's testing the raiding mechanics. What's going to happen after that is we're going to add a new map, which is basically a 4-team map, or it's 1v1v1v1, or however many that was, which is introducing more groups to the game. And as we go on, we're probably going to increase that to, an 8-team map. And then as that continues forward, eventually, really at that point, there's no difference than a survival game, apart from persistence. So we're going to continue updating in that sort of manner until we feel like there's enough there that would merit the full game to be released. Next we'd love for it to be next year, but it really depends on how things go. So it's a pretty soft next year.
Perfect. And I think that's pretty much all I had for you. Is there anything else you would like to tell anybody before we wrap everything up?
Just, if there's that testing period is open now, if you're interested in getting on board and helping back the game and joining in these testing experiences, we'd love to have you there. And just tell your mates about the game. We need people to know that we exist and want to get the word out there. And just thank you for having me on.
I'm glad to have you, and I think everybody else is probably just happy to actually hear from you guys and get some of this information that I don't think everybody seems to know about. So either way, thank you so much for being on with me. Hopefully we can do this again maybe sometime in the future when we get closer to early access. But I think that's pretty much all I've got for you. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.
And that is going to wrap up the interview. Let me know what you guys thought down in the comments down below. Make sure to go let the devs know on their Discord if you guys have any feedback for them. You should be able to find a feedback page there. But otherwise, I hope you guys enjoyed this. And if you want to see more content on Renown, make sure to like and subscribe if you guys are enjoying it. I'm Game Advisor, and I want to give a big shout out to all of our Platinum and above channel members, which include Caustic FPV, Jonathan S, and Jim Phillips. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm Game Advisor, and I'll see you next time.